Imagine you go to a restaurant and you order yourself a burger. But instead of a burger, they serve you a salad. And when you ask the server why you got a salad, they tell you it's because of a new government rule. Salads have to account for the certain percentage of meals eaten in Canada. And that's ridiculous, you might say, and you wanted a burger, so you should get a burger. Nobody would accept something like this when they went to a restaurant, so why would they accept it when they browse the internet? That is the essence of Bill C-11, a solution looking for a problem that doesn't exist, and the latest attempt from these Liberals to stick their nose in where it doesn't belong and limit the freedoms of Canadians. And I would hope that the member from Louis Saint Laurent will share a burger with me, because I'm going to share my time with him. So right now, Canadians get to pick things that they get to see online through their very own viewing habits, their searches, their choices, Madam Speaker. But if Bill C-11 passes, the videos they watch on YouTube, the movies they stream on Netflix, and the podcasts they listen to on Spotify would all be subject to government regulations requiring the promotion of certain content. They would deem the content that you can and can watch. Of course, they cannot explain what that content is. They haven't answered that question. But by putting the rules for what this bill is calling Canadian content in the hands of government and unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats, the Liberals would be free to amplify the voices they like and silence the ones they don't. You know why? Because they appoint the body that does that, because they appoint the head of the CRTC, without telling us what kind of content, of course. Let's face it, C-11 is just another attempt to drastically expand the size and scope of government, to control what Canadians think, to limit their fundamental rights and freedoms of what they get to see online. No government should ever be given the additional powers to censor and regulate what Canadians say and see, but especially on the entire, infinite, unending internet. The bill states that any content that generates revenue, yes, even cat videos, will be subject to regulation that will be under the control of the CRTC. And yet it lays out the very path for hiring the internet czar that would do that would give the purview of that to somebody else, to an unelected bureaucrat appointed, of course, by a government that wants the control. Now, this is a debate about amendments, and specifically with regard to the issue of censoring user-generated content. That's what regular people put online. The government was really never going to consider that amendment, because they took it out of the bill to begin with, and I'll tell you why. Here's the response to trying to get user-generated content out of the mix. It's in Amendment number 3. It's part of what we're discussing here. The government respectfully disagrees with Amendment number 3 because it would affect the Governor and Council ability to publicly consult on and issue a policy direction to the CRTC to appropriately scope the regulation of social media services with respect to their distribution of commercial programs, as well as prevent the broadcasting system from adapting to technological changes over time. That's their response. The rationale behind the rejection for content creators is finally, they finally said the quiet part out loud. It's right here. For the government that claims that user-generated content was never going to be part of this bill or won't be part of this bill, they took out that amendment, and then they rejected the fact that the amendment would have been put back in the bill. It says the opposite right in the rationale. The government wants the power to direct the CRTC on user content today, and they want the power to do it in the future.
Hey, so, real quick, I hope you all notice that she is not just specifically talking about citizens. She's actually talking about everybody, you know? She's actually talking about herself as well. She doesn't want to be subjected to that either. It's not just she's being as conservative, but she's actually thinking about herself as well. Not just the Canadian YouTubers that are trying to make it big.
Regulatory power over user content is confirmed in that explanation. It covers YouTube videos, podcasts, and any other content on platforms we don't even know exists yet, because that's what adapting to technological changes means. They've regulated something that doesn't even exist yet. So there you have it. A statement that you heard from the minister on this point is the exact opposite of his response in the House, his response in committee, his response on television, which makes it the actual opposite of the truth. He will also ensure that we are the only country, the only democratic country in the world where this is actually a thing, where we're the only country to engage in this form of regulation on things that you or I would put on the internet. It leaves absolutely no doubt in the minds of anybody who has read this legislation. People like Margaret Atwood, people like Senator David Adams Richards, the purveyors of cat videos from coast to coast, absolutely no doubt that this is their plan. They just said the quiet part out loud. Platforms are in and user-generated content is in, and anything else is simply untrue. We have so many philosophical issues with this bill, but I could stand here all day and talk about them. But what I want to touch on is some very practical ones, like the mandate of the CRTC. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data is added to the internet every day, every single day. Do you really believe that the Liberal government or that any bureaucracy, especially a bureaucracy with this government, can handle the responsibility of regulating that? They can't get you a passport in a reasonable amount of time. They can't do what they're saying they can do. What about the idea that the government needs to save an industry, which of course is ludicrous? The minister says that investment in Canadian production that would further our culture is somehow in need of his rescue. Again, that's the opposite of an actual fact, where my colleagues here will tell me that I'm engaging in disinformation. But it's just not true. Huge investments are being made. And if you looked a little farther than where traditional broadcasters or where they've traditionally been made, or if you've looked a little further or talked to anybody else other than the unions who would lose control over that funding, you would know that that statement is not true. The Motion Picture Association of Canada told a committee in the Senate that they spent over $5 billion a year in investment in 1 year, in 2021. That's more than the $1 billion that the minister is talking about, saying that C11 would bring in. $5 billion is more than $1 billion, and that's in a single year by a single industry association. So what about the fact that Canadian creators haven't asked for this? And in fact, many of them have spoken out against it. Those are the ones that have had tremendous amounts of success, the ones that are going to be held back by this. The creators in this country that without government have reached unimaginable heights, both within Canada and especially outside of Canada. They've been ignored. It isn't about culture, and it certainly isn't about funding. It's about control. And they're doing anything possible to increase the size of the Canadian government and reduce the freedoms of what you see online, of what ordinary Canadians see and put online. Ordinary Canadian citizens. And the government will stop at nothing to do more of that, no matter how much the facts don't line up, no matter how much they can't answer questions about what Canadian content is, who will regulate it, or just simply mislead this House in telling us that the CRTC has no role in this. The Liberals jammed this bill through the House of Commons once already, but the Senate found so many issues with it that they conducted the longest committee study ever on a piece of legislation and proposed 26 amendments. That's, of course, after the Liberals took out the amendment that would leave out user-generated content while telling the Canadian public that that wasn't true. But just like that, just like putting lipstick on a pig, it leaves you with a pig. Putting amendments into Bill C11 just leaves us with C11, a bill that at its core restricts and infringes and penalizes. A bill that can only be fixed by voting it down, by making sure that it never sees the light of day. A Conservative government in this country would have never introduced it. And if members of this House make the mistake of passing it, we will repeal it. We don't need a government deciding what we can and cannot watch. We don't need a government to pick the winners and the losers. We don't need a government to get more involved in the lives of Canadians. They're involved enough, and we see how that's going in this country. We need a small government that makes room for bigger citizens, where government is the servant and and Canadians are the masters.
Now, before you guys get a little screwed up here, when she said we, she meant like her as a citizen, not a politician. Remember that, please.
Mr. Speaker, we're upholding the heritage that Canadians have given the world, that successful creators have put out there. We're here today to stand against Bill C-11, a bill that goes against the principles of freedom, the values that have been the bedrock of our country for 150 years, the heritage that this heritage minister should in fact be protecting. Freedom is the very opposite of this bill. He shouldn't be focusing on arbitrary rules. And if he did, he should be able to at least explain them in this House, in committee, or on television. He should instead be focused on growing the power of people right here in Canada and letting them decide what they can see on the internet.